The briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command fell silent when Captain Marcus Hale slammed both palms on the mahogany table. Outside, the Pacific wind rattled the windows of the Coronado facility, but inside, tension had solidified into something almost visible. 23 SEAL team operators sat rigid in their chairs, eyes fixed forward, while a woman in dress white stood at parade rest near the projection screen. Lieutenant Commander Iris Kovalenko, call sign Nephrite, had just finished presenting her tactical assessment of a hostage extraction in the Makran Coast region, and her conclusion had detonated like a flashbang in church. She'd recommended against the mission entirely. Not a delay, not a modification, a full stand down. "With all due respect, ma'am," Hale said, his Virginia drawl stretching the honorific into something that sounded more like an insult. "We've been planning this operation for 6 weeks. We have satellite confirmation of 3 American contractors in that compound. We have a 12-hour window before they're moved to a secondary location we can't touch. And you're telling me we should just wait." He looked around the room, inviting the other operators to share his disbelief. A few shifted in their seats. Most remained motionless, but their silence spoke volumes. Kovalenko didn't blink. "I'm telling you the intelligence is compromised, Captain. The heat signatures don't match the reported headcount. The guard rotation changed 4 days ago, which means someone knows we're watching. And the compound's proximity to that Iranian naval installation means we'll have fast attack craft on us within 9 minutes of touchdown." She stepped closer to the screen, using a laser pointer to highlight 3 sections of the satellite imagery. "Right here, here, and here. Those aren't storage sheds. They're fighting positions, pre-staged. This isn't a compound, it's a kill box." Hale's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. "So what do you suggest, Lieutenant Commander? That we tell the families their loved ones are coming home in boxes because the new intel officer got cold feet?" The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Kovalenko's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened into flint. "I suggest," she said, her Russian accent barely detectable after 15 years in American uniform, "that we don't send 16 operators into a meat grinder because someone in Washington needs a political win before midterms." That's when Hale said it. He turned to his Master Chief, a barrel-chested veteran named Cole Rafferty, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know what she needs, Master Chief. Someone to punch her in the jaw, knock some sense into that pretty head." The room erupted before the echo faded. 3 operators shot to their feet. Rafferty's face went purple, but Kovalenko simply smiled, and that smile was the most terrifying thing anyone in that briefing room had ever seen. Because Iris Kovalenko had been waiting for this moment her entire career. She'd grown up in Vladivostok, daughter of a Soviet submarine captain who defected in 1992 with nothing but his family and a duffel bag of navigation charts. Her father had taught her 2 things: how to read the ocean and how to endure disrespect from men who feared competent women. She'd enlisted in the Navy at 18, earned her commission at 22, and spent the next decade proving herself in every godforsaken corner of the globe where America needed eyes and ears. She'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan as a tactical intelligence officer, 2 in Iraq, and 1 in Syria that officially never happened. She spoke 6 languages fluently and could read tactical satellite imagery like sheet music. But none of that mattered to men like Captain Hale. To them, she was just another diversity hire, another box checked on some admiral's equity scorecard. They saw the high cheekbones and dark hair pulled into a regulation bun and assumed she'd gotten her rank on her knees instead of on her feet. They didn't know about the shrapnel scars on her left shoulder from Kandahar. They didn't know she'd personally identified the compound where ISIS was holding the Yazidi girls in 2014, saving 43 lives. They didn't know her call sign, Nephrite, came from the jade green flare she'd used to mark an extraction point in Mosul when her radio died, and her team was pinned down by sniper fire. They didn't know, and they didn't care to know. Kovalenko turned to face Hale directly. "Captain, I've served with operators who could take apart an enemy position with nothing but a knife and bad intentions. I've called in airstrikes that turned entire grid squares into parking lots, and I've held dying men in my arms while they asked me to tell their children they were heroes. Her voice never rose above conversational volume, but it cut through the chaos like a scalpel. So when I tell you this mission is compromised, it's not because I'm afraid. It's because I've seen what happens when ego overrides intelligence. Hale stepped forward, closing the distance between them until he was well inside her personal space. You think you're smarter than everyone in this room, Lieutenant Commander. No, sir, I think I'm better prepared. Then prove it, he gestured toward Rafferty. Master Chief here was Golden Gloves champion 3 years running before he joined the teams. You want respect. Earn it the old-fashioned way. You and him, boxing ring 0900 tomorrow. You last 3 rounds, I'll listen to your concerns. You don't, you shut up and let the adults plan the mission. The absolute insanity of the proposal hung in the air like tear gas. Rafferty looked like he'd been asked to drown a puppy. Several operators started objecting at once, but Kovalenko raised one hand, silencing them. One condition, she said. Name it. When I win, you run the mission my way. Updated intelligence, revised approach vectors, and a backup extraction plan that doesn't rely on hope and momentum. Hale's smile was all teeth and no warmth. You're not going to win, sweetheart. Then you've got nothing to worry about, Captain. She extended her hand. Hale stared at it like it might be poisonous, then shook it once, hard enough to hurt. Kovalenko didn't flinch. The next 18 hours moved like continental drift for some, lightning for others. Word spread through the Coronado compound faster than gossip at a high school reunion. By sunset, half the base knew about the boxing match. By midnight, betting pools had formed in 3 separate barracks. The odds heavily favored Rafferty, obviously. He outweighed Kovalenko by 80 pounds of pure muscle, had reach advantage, and had been in more fights than most people had been in conversations. But a few smart operators, the ones who'd actually worked with Kovalenko downrange, put their money on the lieutenant commander. They'd seen her move. They'd watched her clear rooms in Ramadi with the same cold efficiency most people used to sort laundry. They knew she didn't make threats she couldn't back up. Kovalenko spent those 18 hours in the gym, but not training. She reviewed the mission files again, cross-referencing them with updated satellite passes and signals intelligence. She made phone calls to contacts in 3 different intelligence agencies. She built a counter-proposal to Hale's plan, complete with alternate extraction routes and contingency positions. Because whether she won or lost tomorrow, those 3 American contractors deserved a rescue attempt that didn't get everyone killed. At 2300 hours, she finally went to her quarters and allowed herself 30 minutes of something resembling emotion. She sat on her bunk in the dark and thought about her father, who died of a heart attack 6 years earlier, without ever seeing her receive her commission as a lieutenant commander. She thought about the men she'd lost in Kandahar, the ones who'd actually treated her like an operator instead of a mascot. She thought about every time someone had underestimated her, dismissed her, or assumed she'd slept her way to success. Then she pushed it all down into the same locked box where she kept her fear, her doubt, and her homesickness, and she went to sleep. 0900 came with the subtle inevitability of a tsunami. The boxing ring had been set up in the main gym, surrounded by what looked like half the naval special warfare community. Word had spread beyond Coronado. Off-duty SEALs had driven in from Camp Pendleton. Some Navy brass had shown up, ostensibly to ensure things didn't get out of hand, but really to watch the spectacle. The crowd formed a dense horseshoe around the elevated ring, their faces a mixture of anticipation, discomfort, and in some cases, barely concealed glee. Rafferty entered first, wearing standard-issue PT shorts and a gray Navy t-shirt. He looked like a truck with a beard, all shoulders and compressed violence. The crowd cheered. He raised one gloved hand in acknowledgement, but his expression remained troubled. He tried to talk Hale out of this 4 separate times since yesterday. The captain had threatened to have him reassigned to a desk in Norfolk if he didn't follow through. Kovalenko entered 30 seconds later and the gym went quiet. She wore black compression shorts and a gray sports bra, her hair braided tight against her skull. The scars on her shoulder were visible now, a constellation of puckered tissue that tracked from her clavicle to her deltoid. She didn't acknowledge the crowd. She climbed through the ropes with economical grace and stood in her corner, eyes distant, breathing controlled. The referee, a senior chief who looked like he'd rather be defusing bombs, called them to the center. This is a sanctioned sparring match. 3 3-minute rounds, standard boxing rules. Touch gloves and return to your corners. Rafferty extended his gloves. Kovalenko tapped them once. "I'm sorry about this, ma'am," he said quietly. "Don't be sorry," she replied. "Just don't hold back, I won't." The bell rang. Rafferty came forward cautiously, which was smart. He knew enough about fighting to understand that underestimating an opponent, any opponent, was how you ended up unconscious on canvas. He threw a probing jab, testing her reaction time. Kovalenko slipped it easily, moving her head just enough. He threw another. She parried. The crowd started murmuring. They'd expected her to run, to survive, to play defense for 3 rounds and claim a moral victory. Instead, she was moving forward, closing distance, working angles. Rafferty adjusted. He started using his reach, throwing combinations designed to keep her at bay. Jab cross hook, jab jab cross. Textbook fundamentals executed with professional precision. Kovalenko took 2 jabs on her guard, absorbed a body shot that would have broken ribs on someone less conditioned, and countered with a right hook that caught Rafferty on the temple. Not hard enough to hurt him, but hard enough to surprise him. The Master Chief's eyes widened fractionally. He reset, coming forward with more aggression now, throwing heat. A straight right that Kovalenko barely slipped. An uppercut she blocked with her forearms. A left hook to the body that connected and drove the air from her lungs. She circled right, staying mobile, making him work for position. When he committed to a combination, she ducked under the last punch and drove 3 short hooks into his ribcage. Rafferty grunted, covered up, backed off. The bell ended round 1. Both fighters returned to their corners. Rafferty's cornerman, another SEAL, was talking urgently, probably telling him to use his size advantage, press her against the ropes, make it a strength contest instead of a boxing match. Kovalenko had no cornerman. She sat on her stool alone, breathing steadily, eyes tracking Rafferty across the ring. Captain Hale stood at ringside, arms crossed, face unreadable. Round 2 began with Rafferty implementing the new strategy. He came forward aggressively, cutting off the ring, forcing Kovalenko toward the ropes. When he got her there, he unloaded. Body shots designed to break her will. Hooks to the head meant to overwhelm her guard. For 30 seconds, it looked like the fight was over. Kovalenko covered up, absorbed punishment, and the crowd started making noise. Then she exploded. She caught Rafferty mid-combination with a check left hook that snapped his head sideways. Before he could recover, she pivoted off the ropes and drove a right hand into his solar plexus with surgical precision. Rafferty's mouth opened in a surprised "oh," his guard dropped 6 inches. Kovalenko stepped in and threw an uppercut that started somewhere near the floor and ended on Rafferty's chin. The Master Chief didn't go down, but he staggered backward 3 steps, gloves at his sides, legs suddenly uncertain. The gym went absolutely silent. Kovalenko didn't press. She backed off, gave him space to recover and reset in the center of the ring. Rafferty shook his head like a wet dog, clearing the cobwebs, and his expression changed. The discomfort was gone. Now there was only respect and something like relief. He'd been ordered to fight her. Now he got to actually fight her. They met in the center and went to war. Not the tentative sparring of round 1, not the strategic positioning of round 2, but an actual firefight rendered in fists and footwork. Rafferty threw combinations with bad intentions. Kovalenko countered with pinpoint accuracy. He caught her with a right cross that split her eyebrow. Blood ran down her face. She drove a left hook into his kidney that made him gasp. They traded body shots like currency, each impact drawing grunts from the crowd. The bell saved them both. Round 3. Both fighters showing damage now. Rafferty's left eye was swelling shut. Kovalenko's right eyebrow looked like someone had taken a razor to it. They touched gloves at the center of the ring, an acknowledgement passing between them that transcended words. The final round was poetry written in violence. Rafferty used every ounce of his experience, every dirty trick he'd learned in back alley fights from Bangkok to Barcelona. Kovalenko matched him with technique so precise it looked choreographed. She slipped punches by millimeters, countered with combinations that arrived from impossible angles, and moved like water through his offense. With 1 minute left, she caught him with a left hook to the body, right hook to the head, then a straight right that put him on the canvas for the first time in his professional fighting career. The referee started counting. The crowd held its collective breath. Rafferty made it to his feet at 7, and the referee checked his eyes. "You good to continue, Master Chief?" "Hell yes, I am." They resumed. Both fighters emptied their tanks in the final 30 seconds, throwing everything they had left. When the bell rang, they were standing toe-to-toe in the center of the ring, gloves still raised, lungs burning, bodies screaming for oxygen. The referee raised Kovalenko's hand. The decision was academic. Everyone in that gym knew who'd won. But something more important had happened. When Rafferty pulled off his gloves and extended his hand, when Kovalenko shook it and he pulled her into a brief embrace, when the SEALs who'd been mocking her yesterday started approaching the ring to show respect, the entire temperature of the room shifted. She hadn't just won a boxing match. She'd earned something that couldn't be granted or awarded or mandated by regulation. She'd earned their belief in her competence. Captain Hale stood at ringside, face carved from stone. When Kovalenko climbed out of the ring, blood still dripping from her eyebrow, he met her eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked out of the gym without a word. 2 hours later, the mission planning room had a very different energy. Hale stood at the head of the table, but this time, Kovalenko stood beside him. Her eyebrow had been glued shut by the corpsman. A purple bruise was blooming on her jawline. She'd changed back into her uniform, and now she controlled the presentation screen. "Based on updated intelligence gathered over the last 24 hours, she began, her voice steady despite the swelling in her lip, "I'm recommending a revised approach to the Makran extraction." She pulled up new satellite imagery. "First, we need to acknowledge this compound is compromised, but the contractors are still there, which means we have a 48-hour window before transfer. That gives us time to do this right." She walked them through her alternative plan. Instead of a direct helicopter insertion, she proposed a maritime approach using combat rubber raiding craft launched from a submarine 12 nautical miles offshore. Instead of hitting the compound directly, she recommended a simultaneous strike on the nearby Iranian naval installation, creating a diversion that would pull the compound's quick reaction force away. Instead of a single extraction point, she'd identified 3 alternatives based on likely enemy response patterns. The operators listened without interruption. When she finished, Hale turned to his team leaders. "Thoughts?" Lieutenant Jake Thornton, one of the more experienced team leaders, leaned forward. "It's aggressive, but it accounts for variables the original plan ignored. I like it." Others nodded agreement. One by one, the SEALs who dismissed her yesterday started offering tactical refinements, building on her framework instead of tearing it down. Rafferty, sporting a spectacular black eye, added insights about the maritime approach based on his dive experience. Within an hour, they had a plan that synthesized Kovalenko's intelligence with the operator's tactical expertise. It was better than either could have created alone. Hale listened to everything, his expression unreadable. When the discussion wound down, he stood and placed both hands on the table again. But this time, the gesture wasn't aggressive. It was contemplative. We run the mission in 72 hours, he said. Lieutenant Commander Kovalenko will serve as primary intelligence coordinator during execution. She'll have direct comms with all elements and veto authority if she spots indicators of compromise. He looked directly at her. That enough trust for you, Lieutenant Commander? It's a start, Captain. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. Master Chief Rafferty, you've got operational command of the assault element. Coordinate with Kovalenko on approach vectors and extraction timing. Lieutenant Thornton, you're running the diversion strike. I want it loud enough to wake up Tehran. The briefing dissolved into focused activity. Team leaders clustered around terrain models. Communicators coordinated with the submarine service. Weapons specialists started pulling gear for a maritime insertion. And in the middle of it all, Kovalenko stood at the table, bleeding and bruised and finally seen. Rafferty approached her as the room cleared. That uppercut, he said. Where'd you learn that? My father, he boxed in the Soviet Navy. He teach you anything else? He taught me that respect isn't given to people who ask politely. It's earned by people who prove they belong. The Master Chief nodded slowly. You proved it, ma'am. Question is, can you do it again when the bullets are real? Kovalenko's smile was small but genuine. I guess we'll find out in 72 hours. The mission launched at 0200 on a moonless night when the sea was the same color as the sky. Kovalenko watched from the Tactical Operations Center aboard the USS Michigan, a Ohio-class guided missile submarine currently holding position 45 feet below the surface of the Arabian Sea. Around her, the operations center hummed with controlled urgency. Multiple screens displayed feeds from drone surveillance, satellite imagery, and helmet cameras worn by the assault team. She wore a headset that connected her to every element of the operation. In front of her was a digital terrain model of the target area, updated in real time by satellite and drone feeds. Her role was simple in concept, impossible in execution. Watch everything, process everything, and identify the moment when the plan needed to change. Raider 1, this is Overwatch, she said into her mic. What's your position? Rafferty's voice came back, slightly distorted by satellite relay. Overwatch, Raider 1, we're 3 mics from insertion point. Sea state is calm. No visual contact with hostile vessels. Copy, Raider 1, diversion element status. Lieutenant Thornton responded immediately. Overwatch, diversion is in position, holding at designated coordinates, ready to initiate on your call. Kovalenko checked the mission timeline. Everything was running 90 seconds ahead of schedule, which made her nervous. When operations ran too smoothly, it usually meant you'd miss something. She toggled to the drone feed, studying the compound. The heat signatures were consistent with her latest intelligence. 3 main buildings, guard positions at the corners, and... wait. She zoomed in on the eastern perimeter. 2 heat signatures moving in a pattern that didn't match the expected guard rotation. She pulled up the historical footage from the last 6 hours and ran it at accelerated speed. Those 2 guards hadn't moved from that sector since 2300 hours. Everyone else rotated every 2 hours like clockwork. These 2 stayed put. Raider 1, Overwatch, hold at current position. Overwatch, Raider 1 holding. What have you got? Possible static observation post on the eastern perimeter. 2 personnel haven't moved in 3 hours. Could be spotters for an early warning system. A pause, then Hale's voice cut in. He was monitoring from Coronado, thousands of miles away, but his authority was absolute. Overwatch, recommend we abort. If they've got spotters we didn't account for, the compound security is heavier than projected. Kovalenko studied the feed more closely. The 2 heat signatures were positioned behind what looked like a storage shed, angle of observation pointing not at the compound, but at the sea approaches, exactly where they'd need to be to spot incoming rubber boats. But something was off. Their positioning was good, but their behavior wasn't. Guards on a boring post shifted weight, moved around, took smoke breaks. These two were absolutely stationary, had been for 3 hours. She made a decision. Negative abort. Raider 1, those heat signatures are decoys. Mannequins with heat sources, probably positioned to make us think security is tighter than it is. Classic misdirection. Another pause. Overwatch, that's a hell of an assumption to make with 16 lives on the line. Not an assumption, Captain. Look at the thermal bloom. It's too consistent. Human bodies lose heat unevenly, shift position, generate variable signatures. These are reading like space heaters in human-shaped containers. They want us to see them and back off. Hale was quiet for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. Then, Raider 1 continued to insertion point. Overwatch has operational control. If she says go, you go. Rafferty acknowledged, and the rubber boats resumed movement. Kovalenko watched her screens with the intensity of a chess master 3 moves from checkmate. The boats reached the insertion point without incident. The assault element transitioned to water, swimming the final 500 meters using closed-circuit rebreathers that left no bubbles. Thornton's diversion element waited for the signal. When the assault team was 200 meters from shore, Kovalenko gave the order. Diversion, execute now. The night lit up. Thornton's element had positioned themselves near the Iranian naval installation with a collection of pyrotechnics, remote detonators, and one very old but very loud diesel generator they'd rigged to backfire every 30 seconds. When they initiated, it sounded like a full-scale assault. Explosions walked across the installation's perimeter. The diesel generator coughed and roared. Speakers broadcast recorded gunfire and radio chatter in Farsi. The response was immediate. Lights blazed at the compound. Guards started running toward vehicles. Radio traffic spiked. And just like Kovalenko had predicted, the quick reaction force mounted up and raced toward the naval installation, leaving the compound with minimal security. Raider 1, you've got a 5-minute window. Make it count. The assault element moved like smoke through the compound. Door breaches were clean. Guard neutralizations were quiet. Kovalenko watched through helmet cameras as they swept through the main building, cleared rooms with mechanical efficiency, and located the 3 American contractors in a basement room that had been converted to a cell. The contractors were in bad shape, malnourished and showing signs of abuse, but alive and mobile. The team leader confirmed identities using facial recognition software built into his optics. 3 positive IDs. Mission accomplished. Now came the hard part, getting out. Raider 1, Overwatch. Recommend immediate exfil using alternate route Charlie. Fast attack boats launching from the naval installation. ETA to your position 9 minutes. Copy Overwatch, moving to Charlie. But then everything went wrong at once. A guard the assault element had neutralized woke up and triggered an alarm before they could silence him again. Lights blazed across the compound. The remaining security force, small but armed, started converging on the main building. And on Kovalenko's screen, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A third heat signature in the basement, one they hadn't detected before, moving toward the assault team's position. Raider 1, you've got unknown hostile in the basement, approaching from your 6 o'clock. Rafferty's response was immediate and professional. The team pivoted, weapons up, just as a door burst open and a guard emerged with an AK-47. The engagement lasted 3 seconds. The guard went down, but the gunfire had been loud enough to wake the dead, and now everyone within 5 miles knew exactly where the Americans were. Kovalenko's mind raced through contingencies. The primary extraction point was compromised. Alternate route Charlie would take them through the eastern perimeter, right past those decoy heat signatures, but it was their best option. The fast attack boats were closing fast. They needed to move now or they'd be pinned down in a compound they couldn't hold. Raider 1, execute Charlie now. Diversion element, I need another show in 30 seconds, Western Sector this time. Make them think we've got a second assault team. Both elements acknowledged. Thornton's team relocated and initiated another barrage of pyrotechnics and noise. The compound security forces, already confused and outmaneuvered, split their attention. It was just enough chaos for Rafferty's element to move. They went out through a hole they'd blown in the eastern wall, contractors in the middle of the formation, moving with controlled urgency toward the exfil point. Kovalenko watched through the drone feed, simultaneously coordinating with the submarine to ensure the extraction boats were in position. Then she saw it. A technical vehicle, basically a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, racing around the southern perimeter to cut off the assault team's escape route. If it reached the intersection point before Rafferty's element, the Americans would be caught in the open with nowhere to hide. The math was brutal. The technical would arrive 10 seconds before the assault team, 10 seconds to set up the machine gun and start firing, 10 seconds to turn the exfil into a massacre. Unless someone stopped it. Raider 1, technical inbound from the south, ETA 20 seconds to intersection. You need to move faster. Overwatch, we're moving as fast as we can with the packages. They're not in good shape. Kovalenko looked at her screens, at the drone feed, at the submarine's weapon systems. The Michigan carried Tomahawk missiles, but those were for strategic targets, not tactical support. The drones were unarmed surveillance platforms. The diversion element was too far away to help. The assault team couldn't move faster without leaving the contractors behind. Every option was impossible. Except one. Michigan Actual, this is Overwatch. I need fire support on these coordinates, danger close to friendly forces. She transmitted the technical's position. Confirm you can engage. The submarine's captain came on the line. Overwatch, we don't have assets in position for close air support. Nearest air cover is 20 minutes out. I'm not asking for air support. I'm asking what you can give me right now. A pause. We've got small arms available if we surface, but that would compromise our position, and we'd need authorization from NAVCENT. No time. The technical was 15 seconds from the intersection. Kovalenko made a decision that would either save lives or end her career. Diversion element, what's your armament? Thornton's voice came back instantly. We've got small arms, demo charges, and one shoulder-fired rocket left over from the pyro show. Can you make a shot on a moving target from your position? Overwatch, that's a 1,000-meter shot in the dark at a vehicle doing 40 miles per hour. I'd need to be exceptionally lucky or exceptionally good. Which are you, Lieutenant? Both, ma'am. Then prove it. Target is the technical, 10 seconds to intersection. One shot, make it count. She transmitted the coordinates, watched Thornton's helmet camera swing toward the target, saw him drop to one knee, shoulder the rocket launcher, and track the technical's movement through iron sights. The range was insane. The visibility was terrible. The target was small and fast. He fired. The rocket streaked through the darkness like a falling star. For 2 seconds, Kovalenko forgot to breathe. The technical kept moving, driver oblivious to the threat. The assault team kept running, seconds from the intersection. Time crystallized into something sharp enough to cut. The rocket impacted the technical's engine block with a flash of light that turned night into day. The vehicle cartwheeled forward, machine gun tumbling free, driver and gunner thrown clear. It came to rest in the middle of the intersection, blocking the road, burning like a beacon. Good hit, Rafferty's voice was pure adrenaline. Overwatch, that was some shooter you've got. We're past the intersection, moving to exfil. Kovalenko allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of relief. Then she was back to managing the operation. The assault element reached the boats without further contact. The contractors were loaded aboard and covered with thermal blankets. The team transitioned from land to sea with practiced efficiency. Thornton's diversion element extracted separately, using a pre-planned route that took them south along the coast. 90 minutes after insertion, both elements were back aboard the Michigan. The submarine descended to safe depth and turned for international waters. The contractors were in the medical bay receiving treatment. The assault team was in the process of cleaning weapons and debriefing, and Kovalenko sat in the operations center, running the mission replay through her mind, looking for the lessons that would make the next one better. Captain Hale's voice came through her headset. Overwatch, actual, that was exceptional work. You saved lives tonight with decisions that took more courage than most people display in a lifetime. Thank you, Captain, but Thornton made that shot. I just called it. You called it because you saw what needed to happen and had the conviction to make it happen. That's leadership, Lieutenant Commander, the kind that can't be taught. A pause. The kind I was wrong to doubt. Those last 6 words cost him something to say. Kovalenko recognized the weight of them. We got everyone home, sir. That's what matters. Agreed, get some rest. We'll debrief properly when you're stateside. The connection ended. Kovalenko pulled off her headset and stood, her legs protesting after hours of sitting. She made her way through the submarine's cramped passages to the medical bay, where the 3 contractors were receiving care. They looked up when she entered, eyes hollow from their ordeal but aware enough to recognize that she was someone important. You're the one who got us out, the oldest contractor said. His name was Michael Torres according to the mission file, civil engineer, 61 years old, father of 3. He'd been held for 6 weeks. I coordinated the extraction, Kovalenko replied. But 16 SEALs executed it. They're the ones who walked into hell to pull you out. They said you called the shots, made decisions that saved everyone. Torres extended a trembling hand. I don't know how to thank you for that. She shook his hand gently, mindful of his weakened condition. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Torres. Just get home to your family and live a good life. That's thanks enough. She stayed for a few more minutes, ensuring they were comfortable, then made her way to her assigned rack. The submarine's crew had given her a small berth near the operations center, private enough to decompress. She sat on the narrow bunk and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of the last 72 hours. The boxing match, the revised mission plan, the execution, the split-second decisions that had meant the difference between success and catastrophe. She'd proven herself in ways that shouldn't have been necessary, fighting battles that had nothing to do with enemy combatants and everything to do with earning respect from people who should have given it by default. But she'd won, not just the boxing match, not just the mission. She'd won something more fundamental, the right to be seen as competent. The burden of proof had shifted. Next time, maybe they'd trust her judgment from the start. Maybe. She pulled out her phone and looked at a photo of her father, taken years ago when he was still healthy. He stood on the deck of a fishing boat in Vladivostok, the wind in his graying hair, smiling at something off camera. She wished he could see her now, see what his lessons had built. I did it, Papa, she whispered. I made them see me. She didn't cry. She was too tired for that, and tears wouldn't have changed anything anyway. Instead, she lay back on the bunk and closed her eyes, letting the gentle roll of the submarine carry her toward something like sleep. 72 hours later, Kovalenko stood in a briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command, this time not as the outsider but as part of the team. The mission debrief had been exhaustive, every decision analyzed, every outcome documented. The contractors were stateside, reuniting with families. The media was reporting a successful rescue operation without details, and the SEALs who'd mocked her a week ago were now nodding respectfully when she spoke. Captain Hale stood at the front of the room. Before we conclude this debrief, I want to address something that happened prior to the mission. He looked directly at Kovalenko. I challenged Lieutenant Commander Kovalenko to a boxing match to prove herself worthy of respect. That was wrong. It was unprofessional, it was unworthy of my rank, and it perpetuated exactly the kind of culture we need to leave behind. The room was silent. Hale continued. The lieutenant commander accepted that challenge and exceeded every expectation, but she shouldn't have had to. Her record spoke for itself. Her intelligence work spoke for itself. The only thing that needed to change was our willingness to listen. He paused. I'm formally apologizing to Lieutenant Commander Kovalenko, and I'm recommending her for commendation based on her performance during the operation. Kovalenko stood. Permission to speak, Captain. Granted. The boxing match was unnecessary, and you're right that it shouldn't have happened. But it did happen, and it served a purpose. Sometimes proving yourself in a language that people understand is more effective than waiting for them to learn yours. She looked around the room. I'm not angry, I'm grateful. Because now when I make a recommendation, it will be evaluated on its merit, not on assumptions about my gender or my appearance. That's all I ever wanted. Rafferty stood. Lieutenant Commander, about that uppercut. I've been thinking about it. I'd like to ask you to run a class on hand-to-hand combat for the team, if you're willing. Other operators nodded. Thornton added, and I'd value your input on the intelligence assessment for our next operation. Your analysis was sharper than anything we've worked with before. One by one, the men who dismissed her started offering respect in the only way they knew how, by asking her to teach them, to work with them, to make them better. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what equality should look like. But it was real, and it was earned, and it was a start. 2 months later, Kovalenko received orders to a new assignment. She'd been selected to serve as the intelligence coordinator for a joint task force operating in the South China Sea, working with SEAL teams, Marine raiders, and special operations forces from allied nations. It was a significant promotion, a vote of confidence, and an acknowledgement that her skills were needed at a higher level. But before she left Coronado, she did 2 things. First, she ran that hand-to-hand combat class for Rafferty's team, teaching them the techniques her father had taught her, the ones that blended Soviet military combatives with practical experience. The SEALs trained hard, asked good questions, and treated her like the professional she was. Second, she met Captain Hale for coffee at a place off base, neutral ground where rank could be set aside for an hour. They sat across from each other in a booth by the window, watching traffic move past on the Pacific Coast Highway. You're going to do well with the task force, Hale said. They're lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have the opportunity, but I wanted to thank you before I left. Thank me for what? For giving me the chance to prove myself, even if you did it in the worst possible way. She smiled slightly. You could have just ignored me, assigned me to a desk, and moved on. Instead, you challenged me. And yeah, it was rooted in bias and unprofessionalism, but it also gave me a platform to demonstrate competence in a way that no amount of performance reviews could have matched. Hale shook his head. I'm not sure that's a thank you I deserve. I put you in a position where you could have been seriously hurt, all because my ego couldn't handle being contradicted by someone I'd underestimated. You did, but I chose to accept the challenge, and I'd do it again because the alternative was staying invisible. She leaned forward. Here's what I learned, Captain. Respect isn't a gift. It's a transaction. I gave you proof of competence, and you gave me operational authority. That transaction changed everything. Now the next woman who comes through won't have to fight the same battles because we established a precedent. The precedent should have been that competence is assumed until proven otherwise, not the other way around. Should have been, yes, but we live in the world that is, not the world that should be. And in the world that is, sometimes you have to take a punch to prove you can give one back. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. When they parted ways in the parking lot, Hale extended his hand. Kovalenko shook it. One more thing, he said. That call you made during the operation, using Thornton's rocket to take out the technical, that was the single best tactical decision I've seen in 15 years of operations. I wanted you to know that. I appreciate that, Captain. I mean it. You saw the problem, identified the solution, and executed without hesitation. That's the kind of leadership we need more of. He paused. The kind I should have recognized from the beginning. Kovalenko nodded and climbed into her car. As she drove away from Coronado, heading toward whatever the next chapter would bring, she thought about legacy. Her father had given her the tools to survive in a world that didn't want her. She'd used those tools to carve out space for herself and others who would follow. And now she was moving forward, not as someone who'd had to fight for recognition, but as someone who'd earned it and could use it to open doors for others. The sky over the Pacific was the color of jade, the same green as the flare she'd used in Mosul all those years ago. The same color as her call sign, Nephrite, which meant strength and protection. She'd lived up to that name, and she'd do it again as many times as necessary in whatever form the challenge took. Because that's what competent people did. They proved themselves over and over until proving themselves was no longer necessary, until their presence alone was proof enough, until the next generation didn't have to fight the same battles. She drove north, toward the future, leaving behind the bruises and the doubts and the men who needed to see her bleed before they'd believe she could lead. The road ahead was long, but she'd walked longer roads and survived worse fights. This was just the beginning.